now. Please visit www.housinghealthchafee.org and visit the CMHC tab. And Chafee has 2 F's and 2 E's. I will drop a link into the chat at the bottom of the screen too, so that you can see that. I would like to offer public gratitude to the rest of the Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition board, who have all been instrumental in pulling the summit together. That includes Jennifer Kermode of Gunnison Valley Regional Housing Authority, Lisa Bloomquist Palmer of Homes Fund, Betsy Crum of the town of Snowmass Village, and Reed McCullough of the Chafee Housing Trust. So thanks, gang, for making this work fun. I think that you're going to love the summit events that we've designed for you. For today's Zoom event, I just want to point out a couple of technical features. As audience members, you're all muted, which just means that if you talk, we're not going to be able to hear you. So I encourage you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. It's Q&A button. If you have a question anytime during the presentation, you can ask your question just by clicking on Q&A, typing your message in and hitting enter, and they'll come to me. Once the panelists have finished their presentation, I'll ask the questions on your behalf. So don't hesitate to jump into the discussion and ask away. So now for the main event, I have invited guests from the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority to discuss their new small-scale housing program. Our panelists today include Jerilynn Francis, Terry Barnard, and Christy Budish. Jerilynn Francis is CHFA's Marketing and Community Relations Director. She has over 20 years of experience in housing policy, communications, and community relations. She's been a member of CHFA's team for 13 years, currently leading CHFA's Marketing and Community Relations Division. Prior to joining CHFA, Jerilynn served as the Vice President of Public Relations for the Home Builders Association of Metro Denver. She has a bachelor's degree from Colorado State University and completed her master's degree at the University of Denver. We're also joined by Terry Barnard, CHFA's Community Development Lending Manager, who has more than 22 years of experience in the affordable housing industry, mostly spent in multifamily loan originating and underwriting and tax credit underwriting. Terry has been with CHFA for over 16 years and spent nearly 6 with Enterprise Community Investment. He currently manages the multifamily loan originations team and is accredited lead green associate. Christy Budish, last but not least, is CHFA's Commercial Operations and Underwriting Manager. She's a seasoned leader with 18 years of asset management experience and has been with CHFA since early 2010. During her tenure, she's been responsible for CHFA's multifamily program compliance department, and most recently, the Commercial Operations and Underwriting team. Prior to her work at CHFA, Christy was vice president of a private development firm overseeing project and asset management of various multifamily development projects. So welcome Jerilynn, Terry, and Christy to Colorado Mountain Housing Coalition's virtual 21 Summit. And I will now pass the Zoom microphone over to you three for your panel presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you to everyone for having us. Becky, I think you were going to display our PowerPoint presentation for us, and so we will begin there.
Okay, bear with me. As usual, I am working to get you there. Okay.
All right, that's perfect. Thank you so much. And we can go ahead and dive right into that next slide. I am Jerilynn Francis, Director of Marketing and Community Relations for CHFA. It's a pleasure to be with you. Many of you may be familiar with CHFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, but for those of you who aren't, or for those of you who are, just a friendly reminder of our mission. We work to strengthen Colorado by investing in affordable housing and community development all across the state. Our vision, next slide, please, is that everyone in Colorado should have the opportunity for housing stability and economic prosperity. And our work spans all 64 counties of the state. Next slide, please. Over the past several years, as we've worked to further engage in our mission and vision, one of the initiatives that we have delved deep into is increasing our community engagement. We know that the needs of Colorado, the housing needs of Colorado, the economic development needs of Colorado are very diverse and they are vast. And so in order to ensure that we continuously had our fingers on the pulse of what those needs are, we looked to expand all of our community relations team members to cover all areas of the state. We have previously had, as many of you know, representation in Grand Junction. We have a office located right on Main Street in Grand Junction. And we thought that is excellent. And we want to continue to build out that presence. So we have added community relationship managers in the Pueblo area. Let's go back to that last slide. In the Pueblo area, South Central Colorado and Southwest Colorado. And I believe we have several of our community relationship managers on the call with us today. Margie Joy is the newest member of our team serving the Western Slope. Chris Lopez, the Southwest Colorado region, Jeff Ousley in South Central, and Caroline in Southern Colorado, based out of Pueblo. In addition to our Grand Junction office, we also opened a satellite office in Alamosa. We look forward to expanding the community relationships team, and later this year, we'll also be adding representatives to serve Northern Colorado and Eastern Colorado, so more to come on that front. But next slide, please. As we work to integrate our CRMs in community, we developed this approach of engagement through listening and outreach, working with our local community partners to identify what your needs were so that we were aware of them and understood exactly how we might best serve them through our products and services, creating new opportunities for investment, whether that's through our existing programs or by innovating new programs and opportunities. And then we start that circle of life all over again by doing more listening and engagement and measurement of outcomes. And so it was through this cycle that we really came to learn and understand the opportunity for small scale development in a way that we hadn't before. And so next slide, please. Through this listening, some of what we heard, let's keep going. And thanks, Don. Thanks for helping us get those slides where we need them to be. What we heard consistently from some of our local partners was that they needed more help of how to get from point A to point B. Many of our community partners were looking at affordable housing, putting together small community collaboratives, or it was a local government themselves, or small scale developers, nonprofits, who said, we have a vision, but we only need a few units. We don't think we're a candidate for tax credits, but we don't know where to begin. How do we take perhaps this land that we have donated, or this money that we have available to us, or this developer who we have interested to work in our community, and move it forward to an affordable housing project? We heard loud and clear that most often these were developments that were going to be 30 units or less, 20 units or less. And that the formation of these partnerships was not traditional. It wasn't what we typically see at CHFA day in, day out through our traditional tax credit or lending programs. We also know that there's an interest for doing this on both for rent or for scale. So we took all of this listening, and next slide, and we brought it back to CHFA. I have to say, it's a pleasure to work at CHFA because we do have such a rich culture of innovation. Anyone on our staff can put an idea on what we call our innovation wall, or at least we could before COVID. It's a virtual wall now. You can still add to it, but it doesn't look quite like what it looks like on the screen. And in that bringing forward ideas, we put together teams to explore how might we move these concepts forward. And it was from that process that the Small Scale Housing Innovation Project, affectionately named SHIP, came to be at CHFA. And as we worked on that project, there were two teams that formed, one to look at a financing solution and one to learn and look at the technical assistance solution. So that's what Terry, Christy, and I want to chat with you about today. So next slide. On the technical assistance, let's look again. What we developed was a continuum of technical assistance. So next slide, please, Becky. This continuum takes a variety of approaches to helping create resources for our Colorado community partners to learn more about that, how to move from A to B. So we are putting together a web-based developer's guide. We are working with a great partner, Enterprise Communities, to help us put together that guide that's going to be a broad-based resource of how to do affordable housing development in Colorado. It won't be specific just to small scale developments, but we know that is the key area of interest. So we've tried to keep that top of mind as we put together the case studies and the topics and the content. It also won't be specific to rural communities, but there again, we know that is a huge need for knowledge sharing. So we're keeping that top of mind as we're putting together the information. This will be a web-based platform. We expect it to launch at the end of June or early July. And it's going to be a go-to resource for anyone to have access to at any point in time for some of those fundamentals. In addition, moving along this continuum, we know we want to offer more trainings and webinars, bringing to life some of that information that we'll be putting together in the guide, but also looking to many of our partners, our colleagues at DOLA and Division of Housing, our colleagues at Interfaith Alliance who are offering trainings and webinars, and making sure that we're sharing information about the great resources that they're providing. Our colleagues here at this coalition and all of the great trainings and webinars, and ensuring that we're doing our part, not just to participate in them like we are today, but also to help promote them to those who we know would benefit from the information. And then at the most hands-on level of technical assistance, what we wanted to do was hire some consultants, those professionals who have great reputation and expertise, putting together affordable housing deals right here in Colorado, and do some matchmaking and really marry them up with those small community collaboratives who need that hands-on assistance and provide that TA. We also know that a lot of times there's some dollars that are needed to just get these projects off the ground. And so combined with that technical assistance provider, thinking through how can we provide some grant funds for them. So with that, I'm going to invite my colleague, Christy Budish, to come online and talk through more of the details about our new technical assistance program that we've launched.
Great, thanks, Jerilynn. Becky, go ahead and advance the slide, please. Okay, so as Jerilynn touched on, CHFA is going to be providing some pro bono TA, which is how we refer to technical assistance typically. And as she mentioned, we're looking to provide that in the form of a partnership with some experienced affordable housing consultants that have a lot of experience across Colorado in helping to move small housing projects forward. Jerilynn also touched on briefly, I think, the grant funds that we have available to support that work. So this is non-TA related expenses, things like market studies or soils reports or environmental assessments, things that happen early in the process that you may not have all of your funding sources in place for, so you may need a little bit of assistance there. We think maximum grant amount would be about $20,000, but we think probably the median amount is closer to $7,500. So definitely enough to cover a market study or something along those lines. Next slide, please. Okay, so priorities of the technical assistance program. So we're really focused on projects that are serving 80% of their area median income or below. That aligns well with our mission. We're also looking to leverage capacity in terms of resources from other public, nonprofit, foundation, or community partners. So CHFA wants to be at the table with you, but we also want to bring other folks to the table, local municipalities, foundations, Division of Housing, partners that we all work with day in and day out who could actually help to bring resources to the table. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the pilot program. So we have just completed our first round of awards, and we do expect to do 2 rounds of technical assistance applications this year. So projects that are eligible to apply would include for-profit and nonprofit sponsors, local governments, or community collaboratives. We are focused on projects with 30 units or less. Not only did we see the need in that size, but we feel like once you start to get a little larger than that, there are other resources that start to become available. You start to have interest in the private development community. You start to have interest from local banks. And frankly, you also have access to the tax credit program when it gets to be a bit larger. So we're really focused on smaller projects that may have some roadblocks facing development. Sorry. We're looking at both for rent and for sale, new construction, ACK rehab, or preservation. We want to be sure that the project meets a defined community affordable housing need. And I don't mean defined by CHFA, I mean defined by the community. So in some cases, we're seeing that there's a real need for workforce housing. In other cases, it might be large families. It could be seniors, it could be we've even seen some permanent supportive housing needs. So we're looking to be informed by the community, by the sponsor, of what that need is. And then because we're CHFA, we're focused on serving lower incomes. So at least 75% of the units would need to be at 120% of AMI or below. And then 20% of those would need to serve 80% of AMI or below. And we feel like that is consistent with where we're hearing that the need is kind of across the state. Next slide, please. Eligible activities. So this is what those dollars can be used for if you are granted a technical assistance award. So it's really beginning to end. So project visioning and conceptualization and community engagement on the front end, site identification and feasibility, help with financial modeling and understanding market studies and environmental site assessments, that sort of thing. Helping to put together project budgets, which would include estimating construction costs, which we all know is problematic right now. Real estate planning, which would really probably be design team related. You know, how many units can we fit on the site? What amenities would we need? How does this fit into the surrounding area? And then I think last but not least, energy efficiency and performance modeling. And we all know this is kind of a buzzword in the industry, but I think a lot of folks don't realize that there's some real value to this long-term in terms of operating costs. It helps to keep them low. So having that knowledge up front is really helpful when you're planning a project. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's what we can't cover. We want to stay out of the zoning world as much as possible. Those are community-driven decisions, and so we're not looking to fund that type of activity. So if you're looking at a fully entitled site and you're just ready to move forward, then great, we're on board. If you're looking at a site that may need to be rezoned, we can still help, but we would not be helping with that piece of the puzzle. So that's something that the project team would need to take on themselves. We're also not, we're not going to be paying for application fees for land use approvals or building permits or things like that. Those are costs that should be baked into the development budget and paid for with whatever funding sources you're pursuing. Obviously, again, since we're CHFA, we're not interested in funding anything that doesn't support long-term housing affordability. And then finally, we do try to stay out of the political realm as much as possible. So we would not be funding local, state, federal lobbying, candidate or issue campaign activities, or any contributions. So pretty small list, but some critical things to be thinking about. Next slide, please. So, and then I just wanted to touch on, I mentioned that we've had our first round already this year. We're going to have another round in the fall. We're not exactly sure of timing yet, but we will get the word out when that comes around. We are in the process of working with 7 developments right now across the state, evaluating an opportunity for them to participate in this program. And what that looks like is just making sure we have a shared understanding of what they're trying to accomplish and how we can best support that. And then working with the TA consultants that we have engaged to matchmake, to make sure that they're working with the projects that they're best able to serve. The projects we've seen to date are a blend of both new development and AC rehab. We have a couple of projects that are using existing buildings and converting them into housing opportunities. And then just to give you a sense of size, the projects that we have kind of underway right now range from, on the small side, 4 to 5 units up to as many as 17 units. So, really trying to fit that niche need in these markets. And I think that does it for my slides. So I am going to pass the baton over to Terry. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Becky, you want to go ahead and go to the next slide? Okay, one more. As Jerilynn alluded to, we in our small scale housing innovation project, we saw the need for not only financing, but technical assistance as well. We really started off just kind of with an open mind. What we've heard that there's a need in rural communities and for smaller development. How can we help in that arena? And so I worked more on the financing side once we kind of split into the 2 groups. And when we talked, we interviewed probably, I think, 50 people over 30 organizations in our process. And we found about a lot of different needs. And we kind of could categorize these into what we call the personas. And so short-term acquisition financing was something that is a need. That's one thing that's never really been in CHFA's toolbox as far as financing availability, is to be able to have quick financing available that a developer could use to acquire a property and hold it. So that was one need. We could partner with a local lender to kind of help subsidize their interest rate. We could do construction to perm financing on these deals. We could work with a bank partner to collateralize the risk, which was an interesting idea based on our business finance side and our community cash collateral support program. We could offer permanent takeout funds only, which is generally what CHFA's bread and butter has been over the years as a multifamily lender. Another need is for single family housing construction financing, so the construction loan portion of that for smaller type developments. And then finally, single family renter and owner occupied rehab programs were another sort of persona that we found in this. Okay, next slide. So one of the risks involved in thinking about small scale housing, especially multifamily rental, is the underwriting is much more volatile. I mean, how do you underwrite vacancy on a 4-unit deal when one vacant unit would be 25%? So some of it you have to think of over time. If that 1 unit is vacant for the entire year, then yes, it's 25%. If it's vacant for a month out of the year, then it's much less. But still, those underwriting parameters we had to think about those in terms of what made the most sense for these projects to not be set up to fail. Okay, there we go. All right, there you go. Stay on the risk one. Perfect. Expenses, small increases in expenses and operating expenses in the deal also will basically disrupt the cash flow pretty significantly on smaller deals. So that's something else to think of. Where are we underwriting the expenses at a good level that's also not going to set the project up for failure if expenses increase. Rents that may not increase over time. I mean, typically on any multifamily deal, we're trending the rents at 2% and the expenses at 3%. And a lot of times in rural areas, the incomes are not going up that quickly and the rents are not increasing at that same pace. but the expenses tend to go up anyway. And then just fluctuations in market. I mean, if there's a market that has a job dependency on a certain sector, and that sector goes away, you know, what happens to the market? Do the units empty out? Do people move away? We see that in some of the areas, especially in the southeastern part of the state, that's happened over the last 15 years or so, maybe longer. Just things to think about, you know, when we're looking at this. Property management is another thing. In rural areas, there aren't a lot of the properties that are out there are more mom and pop operations that are being managed and operated by individuals, and there aren't the larger property management companies, third-party management companies. And so how do you deal with things like income and rent certifications and restrictions when you're in that environment like we're in? How do you get training out to those management companies to make sure that they're qualifying the residents appropriately? Okay, next slide. So of all the personas that we looked at, we felt like every one of them was being addressed in some other way, either by CHFA or another organization, or we just felt we could address those outside of the SHIP process. And so what we settled on, or concluded on, I should say, settling is like a different thought, is one was just providing direct permanent loans. This is really our bread and butter, as I mentioned. We do some construction lending, but it's on larger 4% deals. We don't really want to get into the construction business so much because we don't have a great capacity to do that. So a direct perm loan that would take out a bank's construction loan made sense. And some of our underwriting parameters that we set, a minimum 120 debt coverage ratio, gives the underwriting a little bit more cushion room in case, you know, expenses increase or vacancies go up. Loan to value, we set it at the lesser of 85% of value or 90% of cost, whichever is less. Market study is interesting because we, as a lender, we want to know that there is a market for these units. If they're being built and they're being set aside for certain income restrictions, then we want to know that there's a population that's going to that's out there that would fill these units. So we would like to see a market study that provides information on what the primary market area is, what other units are in that area, what the rents are, what the vacancies are, the trends in the population, whether that's going up or going down, you know, what the economic drivers are as far as industry, and then the number of income qualified renters in the PMA. We do require an appraisal, as all lenders do. For existing properties, we'd want to see a project needs assessment to sort of drive what rehab is needed at the project. Again, rents must be supported by market study or an appraisal. Now, on vacancy rates, what we concluded with was for projects of 4 to 9 units, we would underwrite these at a 10% vacancy. For 10 to 14, because they tend to fall into more of a, you know, one vacant unit might be 10%. We would say equal the greater of market or 7%. We didn't want to build in so much vacancy that it wouldn't be valuable to these projects. And so we, after some trial and error and some prototype testing and some feedback, we concluded with these vacancy rates. We want to use the expenses that are actual for the area. A lot of times that's looking at line by line. What are the costs in the market for trash? What are costs for insurance? What are, you know, maintenance? Does it cost more to get supplies to this location, or if contract work has to come in, is it more expensive? How much snow removal is needed? Those things. Replacement reserves, we would like to see these projects have reserves set up to take care of any capital needs, because they're smaller units or smaller properties. A smaller replacement reserve deposit doesn't go as far, and so we set this at a minimum of $350 per unit, increasing by 3%. We would like to see an operating reserve of 6 months of expenses and debt service. That's just in case there's any, you know, any decline in the operations as far as rents or expenses going up, rents going down, expenses going up. And then for the term and amortization, we size these as 10 to 20 year terms or 20 to 30-year amortization, depending on whatever the need is. Sometimes the projects can utilize a 20-year AM, sometimes a 30. But either way, 10 to 20-year terms, 20 to 30-year amortization. Okay, next slide. Environmental, we do want to see a phase 1 and would like to know about environmental concerns if the property was built before 78 as far as asbestos and lead-based paint. We have created a modified schedule for asset management of these properties and oversight. It's not as stringent as the tax credit program or Section 8 and those things, but it does ensure that we meet our requirements that we need to for a housing facility loan. For sponsor experience, we realize that many sponsors in rural locations don't have the experience. They have the dream, they have the vision to create housing, but they may not have the experience in housing development. We'll look at that on an individual basis, but we would like to see them have some real estate development experience in some capacity, or if not, then that they're partnering with someone who can help with that. And I think the technical assistance piece can really help with that issue. We would like to see a prepayment, no prepayment for 5 years at least. Affordability restrictions will stay on for the longer 15 years of the loan term. These will have a CHFA regulatory agreement on them. This structure tends to work for most project types, just depending on size and location. So we think that this was a pretty good universal fit for most of the projects in these areas. Okay, next slide. The other financing product that we created through our SHIP process was what we call multifamily collateral support. On our business side, we have the cash collateral support program, and this was basically created off the same principle. What we do is, in reality, we would really prefer to partner with a local bank that is making a loan to a project. We'd rather see the money stay local and stay in the community. Most banks, though, their loan to values tend to be anywhere from 70, maybe 65, 70% up to 80 at the most. And that will leave a gap in the project. So in this particular product, CHFA would provide a cash deposit to the bank that would stay with the bank for a minimum 4 years, that would provide some additional collateral so that the bank would be comfortable making a loan, say, up to 90% of value. Some of the requirements, we would like to see a bank that has a presence in the community or does business within that community. We don't have any asset management or compliance requirements, other than the projects have to serve residents earning up to 120% of area median income or less, which is generally, 120 is generally greater than market anyway. And so we think that these will serve that income band pretty well. Again, it does work for most project types as long as there's a bank willing to do it. It is based on the CCS program. Technically, the way it works is that there's a deposit agreement between the bank and CHFA, and the amount just is that difference between the bank's maximum loan to value and 90%. We did some testing on what that amount would be, and we figured out that $500,000 would likely be the maximum deposit that we would make under this program, even if we were providing 65, like from 65% up to 90% of value. But basically, we give the bank, they do the underwriting, they do the administering of the loan. CHFA just does a cursory review and basically provides the collateral deposit for them. Okay, next slide. And that is all. So thank you very much for your attention. And Becky, I guess we'll go back to you at this point.
Wow, that was fantastic, Christy, Terry, and Jerilynn. Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful overview. We did have some questions come in while we were working on this, and I think the first one was, can we share the PowerPoint? So the answer is yes. And after this event is over, I will download the attendee list and follow up with an email to share that for you. The second question that came through is the technical assistant consultants. How are they selected? How are they identified? And then how are they paired with projects? Is there a process for that, or is it open to the wind? Christy, I think you are still on mute.
I
Okay,
can
how's
dive
that?
in that. Oh, go ahead,
Yeah, I
Christy.
was just going to say we underwent an RFP process earlier this year. So we published an RFP looking for respondents who would be interested in providing technical assistance under this program, vetted those applicants, narrowed the field. And I think initially we were thinking we would select a respondent, but we had so many very positive responses and very qualified responses that we ultimately chose two. And they have some overlapping skill sets and some complementary skill sets. So then as we understand the needs of a particular project, we work with both teams to determine who is the better fit. And then we match them up with the sponsor and they move forward from there.
Thank you. Very thorough answer. The next question is for Terry. If a community has historic data that differs from the underwriting criteria, example, vacancy rates, income, expense history, et cetera, is there flexibility around that?
I would say yes. I mean, we're really, with an existing property, the operations, the historic operations are really the best starting point, you know, and to look at how it's done. We would look at the market anyway and also try to, you know, you can't always predict what's going to happen, but if things are stable, if things are projected to remain stable, then I think there would be some flexibility in looking at how we underwrite that.
Excellent, thank you. Another question was about the income criteria, the AMI percentage served, and it says that projects must include 75% at 120% AMI below, and 20% of the total has to be 80% AMI and below. Or is it 20% of the 75 has to be AMI? Does that make sense in that question? I can flip back to the slide deck piece if we want to.
I'm always trying to find an easy way to say that, and I haven't come up with one yet. It's basically 75% of the units at 120% AMI or less, and of the total units, 20% have to be at 80% or less. So that you could have 25% at market, you could have 55% at 75%. I mean, 55% at 120%. See, I can't do it. 55% at 120 or less, and 20 at 80. So that's the minimum requirement.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's clear as mud. And I'm sure as we continue the conversation forward, there will be more percentages discussed, but I do appreciate you offering that structure. The next question is about the multi-family collateral support. We appreciate that you want to work with local banks. Has this approach been tested with local banks? Has there been conversations with smaller banks and rural communities about using that?
Yes, we've actually talked to a couple of our banks that we work with on the CCS program, cash collateral support on the business side, and they have indicated that they would very much like something on the multifamily side that would work very similarly. We haven't done a deal with them as of yet. We've talked to another bank that through the SHIP process that was also had told us that, yeah, this would have been useful a month ago because they had a deal that apparently they had to walk away from. But we had there was a project in La Junta that we were looking at, and the first route we took was the collateral support piece, and we talked to a local bank, and they just weren't able to get there. But so now we're looking at it through our direct loan piece. But you know, if we can make it work, and we figure it's a win-win for the community and for us. Because we're not sort of stepping on toes, but we're providing a real value.
Thank you. A follow-up question along the same lines is, can you offer us an example of where that multifamily collateral support is in existence on a real project?
Well, it's not.
Okay.
We have yet to do a real project with it other than talking about it and just looking for opportunities. We've done a number on the CCS side, on the business side, and that's worked very well. Okay,
thank you. I appreciate that. Another question was to kind of circle back to the project size, small scale. Is there a maximum size for a project to qualify as this?
I think we have a little bit different metric between the financing piece and the technical assistance. we had started off the SHIP program thinking about projects of 20 units or less. And that's what we stuck with on the financing side, because anything over 20 units starts to get into more of a typical size of multifamily deal that we can underwrite, you know, with our normal parameters. I think on the technical assistance side, you know, Christy can attest to this. They saw a need to really go up to 30 units to be served by this program. So we can still participate on a financing piece on projects that are 25 units or 30 units. It would just be kind of more under a traditional program.
But the technical assistance side, where projects are paired with experienced developers, is about 20 units. Is that correct?
The technical assistance side will go up to 30.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. And then a follow-up question to the same kind of conversation. What if a project is awarded technical assistance, is there another application process to access the financing support as well?
Yeah. So they're completely independent of one another. So the technical assistance provider would potentially help you to identify what funders might be out there to finance your project. And then if CHFA's product looks like it could be a good fit, they might recommend it. They might also recommend a local bank. They might also recommend another funding source. We didn't want to tie the two together. We didn't want the technical assistance to suggest that you had to use a CHFA funding product. So
that's fantastic. So then it sounds like the technical assistance consultants help evaluate that menu of financing opportunities for each individual project. That's
right. Depending on what the need is. Some of the projects that came to us had a pretty good sense of what their financing stack already looked like, and they were looking for some really specific technical assistance. Others were really early in the process, so they hadn't even thought about funding yet. So it just depends on the project, but that's definitely one of the things that the TA providers are equipped to do, is help with that financing piece.
Thank you. You mentioned that there's 2 rounds this year. The first round already happened and the second round is coming in the fall. Do you foresee there being 2 rounds of applications every year moving forward, so long as the project's successful?
So it's a pilot project. So right now we have approval through the end of the year. So 2 rounds this year, and we'll kind of see how that goes. To the extent the pilot is extended, and we all certainly hope and feel like it will be. I think that makes some sense, because as you know, people enter sort of the project cycle at different points in this year, and this gives people an opportunity to come to us if they don't make the spring cutoff. They're just not there yet, but maybe they can make the fall cutoff. So we're hoping to be as flexible as we can be. But again, right now it's just the 2 2021 rounds.
And so there is a deadline to apply based on those rounds. And then the follow-up question is the program competitive?
I think the program competition must be a lending question, because this is a pro bono. The TA provision would be pro bono, so CHFA is covering the cost of that. So I'm thinking maybe that question relates to the financing piece, if it's a competitive rate, maybe.
I think it is more like, is there a limited number of TA consultants available per round? So like if there's 25 applicants, do all 25 receive the technical assistance?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do have a budget that we're working with, and it's a little fluid because we're meeting the needs of the first round. And so then we'll kind of have a sense of what will be available to go into that second round. So we hope to be able to sort of meet most projects. But if we were to see 150 applications, it's not likely that we would be able to do them all. So
very, very fair.
On the financing side, I'll just say that ours is not a competitive program. It's just really, it's a kind of a rolling application. We'll look at projects as they come in.
And so, Terry, to follow up on that, just to make sure we articulate that clearly, there's not 2 rounds for the funding. It's a rolling application. Whenever a project is prepared and meets the criteria, they can apply.
Right. Right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. There's another follow-up question about the multifamily collateral support piece. And I'll try to articulate this well, but could you please provide a little bit more detail on how it works? For example, is the total project cost, and some of it is financed locally, is there a deposit made locally to back that up? Or maybe you could just revisit and describe in greater detail how that piece works.
Yeah, I think for simple math, I would use $1 million. Say if there was $1 million total project cost, which may or may not be accurate to any deal. If you received a loan from the bank at 70% loan to value, then that's $700,000. We would take it up to 90. So we'd put a $200,000 cash deposit with the bank that would allow them to make a $900,000 loan. And then the other 10% can come from another source. We do require 10% equity in the deal, basically from the developer. And that can be anything, anything that the developer brings in. It can be even from the Division of Housing or other soft funds that they bring to the deal, or some might, own the land and they contribute the land as part of the sources. And that can, as long as that comes out to that 10%.
Thank you. That makes a lot more sense. So essentially you're providing some security to the bank that they can extend past their comfort lending ratios by simply putting money into their bank, letting them know they have access to it if something were to go awry.
Exactly. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for explaining that in greater detail. I think that is all the questions that we have, and we're coming close to running out of time. So I hope that all of our audience members enjoyed that presentation as much as I did and learned as much as I did about it. I want to extend a sincere gratitude and thanks to Terry and Jerilynn and Christy for spending time with us today, and also for listening to the needs of rural communities in Colorado and creating this SHIP program. We are very appreciative of your time today and of all the work that you're doing to help bring more affordable housing to Colorado. And from sunny Chaffee County, we say goodbye this afternoon. We'll see you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
Great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.